Well, good morning for those who are looking in online. I'm Dave Robinson, and I'm going to tie the flies, first fly this morning, and Florin Sabac will do the second one. Now, the fly I'm going to tie today is called the Magoo, and I found this pattern by just searching for fall flies, and the name of the pattern came up. And when I looked it up, I found out it was an Australian pattern. It's basically a wet fly. And being an Australian pattern, I got on the email and I emailed my friend who lives in Sydney, Andrew McKenzie. Andrew's a avid fly fisherman. He's a certified FFI master casting instructor. And I met him when we were fishing for bonefish in Aitutaki. So I kind of kept in touch with him. So he sent me a link to a fellow in Australia who's a well-known, apparently, Australian fisherman. He's been on the Australian team for international fly fishing. His name is Craig Colton. And I looked at his website, and he had a really good instruction video on it. So I'm going to basically follow what his instructions are. We'll start with what the materials are. First thing is the hook. And that's a TMCO 100, PMC 100. Now, he had suggested a slight jig hook, but it's about the same size. It's just a wet fly hook, standard wet fly hook, number 8, reasonably wide gape. And the bead, it's a beaded fly, weighted fly, tungsten bead. And you can use these guys, which is a 3.5 millimeter orange bead, tungsten, or other one is this guy here, which is a number 10 sized bead in copper. And of course, I've pre-debarbed the hook. So that goes in the vise, nice and solid. And I've got the bead on here now. This bead is a slotted bead. And so I've got it on there so that the round hole is up against the front of the hook. It restricts the length of the shank a bit. But if you put it on with the slot to the front, the slot ends up twisting around and going over the eye and making it difficult to get the tippet through the eye of the hook. So we won't do that. Mm-hmm. Thread is olive 8/0. And the first thing we'll do is we'll get started on the hook right behind the eye. And I'm going to get the thread in that slot and wrap it around a few times. And that, because the thread's in the slot, even though it's spinning the bead around, eventually it'll tighten up and it will keep the bead from migrating backwards. Did a little sharpen job on my scissors the other day, so it should be good. So the first thing we want to do, the tail on this fly, is a Marabou. And I've got a little bag of all of the Marabou cones here. And it comes out of the bag like yay, so you have an opportunity to select the Marabou that you want. And I'm looking for something that's relatively dark and fairly full in the plume. So I'll search through here and find one that looks enough. And I'll pull it out of the sewn part here. Rather, it's being ornery this morning. Usually these pull right out of the sewn band a bit. I don't know why it's doing this. Okay, we'll do it the hard way. Snip it off. Okay. And I want a reasonable size clump. Marabou's all on the floor. But I want a reasonable size clump. And now when the other guy did it online, he actually did 2 small clumps instead of 1 large clump. But I'm just going to pick one that's kind of fluffy and not too much. So what I'll do is I will measure shank length. I want about shank length or so past the bend of the hook. And then I'll measure it down to where I'm going to tie the end of the hook, where I'm going to tie it in where the head thread is hanging. And at that point, I will trim off the front end of it. Nice and tight. So it just pokes little stubby bits out. Now I'm not going to tie this right dead behind the bead. I want a little bit of space behind the bead for later. So I'm going to bring it about my thread about an eye width behind the bead, and then lay it down and tighten it down just in behind. And I will hold the marabou up by the tip as I cinch down to try and wrap the marabou on top of the hook shank. And we'll take that all the way down to the bend. And when I get to the bend, I will hold the marabou up and I will wrap in behind it over top of the hook. 3 or 4 wraps. And the purpose of that is to keep the marabou, when it's being fished, from wrapping around the hook shank and fouling up the gap of the hook. Now, the next thing we're going to put on here is a little bit of flash. And so what I've got here is some Mirage. You can use crystal flash. I have this Mirage accent that's kind of a silver greenish color. And it's quite fine flash. And all I'm going to do with this is I'm going to take a couple of strands out of the package. 1, 2. And I will cut them out fairly long. So I have 2 strands. And I'll take that and I will tie it down partway down the hook shank there, on 2 on the near side. And I'll wrap that down the near side and then bring the thread back up. Take the other 2 strands and put them on the far side of the hook and wrap them down and hold them on the side of the hook and wrap right back to where I tied the marabou in. And what that does is that puts the flash on the outside edge of the marabou. And I'll pick up the 4 strands and cut them just about the same length as the marabou. So now you got a little bit of flash. What's happening here? There we go. That's better. For some reason, it goes in. Maybe it has something to do. Hang on, let me just check something here. No, I'm not sure what this spotlight business. It's zooming in on me for some reason. Don't know why. This interface has changed so much over the summer. It's just causing issues. Come on. Let me see if I. No. Why am I having this issue? Move the spotlight for the moment and then try again. Don't ask me, it's just being weird. Come on. I don't know, now I've got all of you guys down at the bottom of my thing, so I can't see what the hell's going on. There we go. Weird. Okay, try again. The next thing that goes on. I'm sorry for the distraction here. I'm still getting used to this new application. So the next thing is I'm going to put some wire in. I'll start the same place I did the flash, halfway down the hook shank. And I'm going to tie it on there and wrap down on it. And then just hold it out of the way temporarily with my material clip. So that wire is going to be used to secure the peacock herl. Now, the next thing I need is there's going to be a rib on here. And the rib I'm taking from a cheap neck hackle. And I want something that's got relatively short barbules. So you can see this is just basically a neck hackle that's fairly short. And I'm going to stroke it backwards a bit to get the barbules to stand out. And then I'm going to tie it in with the curved side facing me. And I'm going to bring the thread right back down to where the marabou is. And I'm going to set that down on top of the shank where the tip is. And I'm going to bind that in down the shank a bit and then trim off the tip. So there's my hackle tied in at the back. And then I'm going to do the body. And for the body, it's basically just peacock herl. And I'm going to pick a couple of strands out here that are fairly fuzzy. Pick a couple that look reasonably fuzzy. And I'm going to tie the peacock herl in by the tip. So once again, you'll see I've got my thread kind of up at the front here. I don't know why this keeps doing this.
It's probably got face recognition.
Yeah, and I can't figure out how to put that into that. There's just nothing here that says focus on the damn fly. I didn't have this problem last time. Nope. Let me piss around with this for a minute. It's just driving me nuts. Let's try again. I don't understand this. Oh, it's focusing on my face. I'm going to stand back a little bit here. Maybe that'll help. I'm going to tie that in. I'll have to figure out during the week what I have to do to fix that. So I'm taking my peacock herl all the way back. Get my head down where the fly is. Maybe that'll help. Then I take the peacock herl. I'm just going to wrap it up. I'm tied it in by the tip so that as I wrap the peacock herl up, because the peacock herl is a bit tapered from the tip to the butt, it's going to make the body of the fly get a little bit thicker as we go to the front. And just do reasonably tight wraps, keeping the herl fuzzy. And I'm going to stop kind of almost a bead width behind the bead with the peacock herl. And at that point, I will tie it off on top. Then I'm going to take the wire that I tied in before, and I'm going to spiral that up through the Herl. And all that does is bind the Herl down. So if a fish gets its sharp little toothies in there, it's not going to come unwound. And then tie the wire off. Up in front and then behind. Then with my hackle pliers, I'm going to grab onto the hackle, and I'm going to try to wrap this forward, avoiding the hook shank, hook point, and keeping the flash on the side of the Marabou as much as possible. I'm going to wrap a hackle up the body of the Peacock Herl, so we get a nice little fuzzy rib. And then when we get to the very front, just behind the bead again, that space behind the bead, I'm going to wrap that off and trim it. So that's a good chunk of the fly. Now, the last thing is I'm going to have a soft hackle up the front. And the soft hackle up the front is Partridge, olive Partridge. And to tie that, it's going to be a reasonably furry hackle at the front. I will strip off the stuff I don't want from the butt end of the fly, butt end of the hackle. And then I'll hold that by the tip and stroke some fibers backwards like that. This is classic soft hackle wet fly technique. I'll make that little V like so. And I will tie that in right behind the bead, tie it in by the tip of the hackle. And once that's in there reasonably solid, I'll come in here and I will trim out the tip of the hackle, pull it out, just trim it right out. Get my hackle pliers again. And grab the hackle and that broke off. I'm going to wrap this soft hackle in behind, stroking it backwards a little bit with each wrap. And we really only need to get like 2.5 wraps out of that. And it makes that nice, soft, webby hackle at the front. A couple of wraps in front. And then I'll take the stem out. And pull everything back, put few wraps in right behind the bead, and then whip finish. Trim out. And that's him. That's the one with the orange bead. I also have one here with a brass bead. So that is the Magoo. So it's a little complicated for a basic little wet fly, but it makes a nice furry fly. And when it gets wet, that hackle, that Marabou at the back skinnies right down. But the the dry fly hackle keeps the wet fly hackle in the front from collapsing. So it has a decent body shape to it. Okay, now I'm going to see if I can remove the spotlight and figure out what the hell is going on with. There we go. So I need to spend some time this week. I will piss around with this to figure out how I can get it to actually spotlight on the fly and not on my face. Okay, so Florin, you're on.
Flooring is very, very simple. It's basically just one material, fly, and the bead, or my favorite more recently, bead chain eyes to fish the fly upside down. Okay. Now the material is this thing that's marketed under the name of polar chenille. And it's basically you can sort of see, it's a long stranded, so if you took some flimsy stuff, this is very, very, very soft, and you put it in a dubbing loop and you're really good at making dubbing loops, you might be able to achieve this. So I have this in a so-called fluorescent blue. So it's kind of like a nice light blue. I have a purple. This one is called a purple UV. It just has this kind of nice flashy highlights in it. And then there is a UV black and another zillion colors. I have something here that's olivey, and I have no idea if this is really polar chenille or it's something else, because I lost the original packaging. But you can see there's a certain amount of fluorescence to some of the flash here, so that probably gives nice little highlights in the water. So here's another bead chain eye version of this fly. Okay, so use whatever material you have. You could probably also just do it with the dubbing loop and the dubbing brush and some Arizona semi-seal, and then just kind of try to give it a nice little shape. This one here is actually wet, so the whole thing collapses to a very streamlined fly once it gets wet. And speaking of wet, another very useful tying aid for this material, which is otherwise quite messy, is a little bit of water in a cup on your desk. So just make sure you place the water in a corner where you're not going to accidentally knock it over and create a little mess. You don't want your beautiful materials all getting wet, kind of thing. And let me then get a hook. Oh, the hooks, I just grabbed these. They kind of looked good to my eye. They're labeled a size 6. They're probably other manufacturers size 4. This is a fairly large one. I was fishing these types of patterns in purple, black, and blue for chums. I was catching chums. I lost all the 6 flies that I tied. I caught fish with all the 6 flies that I tied. So now I'm retying another batch for next time I go, probably the last one this season. Now, this looks like a very strong, heavy hook. I did manage to unbend a couple of them by pulling a little too hard on both fish and snags. So on the plus side, the hook did not break. So that's that. So use whatever your preferred hook is, and whatever material you have at hand probably will work just as well. Okay, so I'm gonna place the hook in the vise. Try to put it so I can use the rotary feature of the vise a little bit. Good enough. All right. So I'm using the the thread to match the color of the bead. Could probably go one size up on the bead here. The disadvantage of that would be that I end up with a much bigger gap between the back of the bead and the body of the fly. And I wrap back to about halfway down the shank. Okay, so you will see this is incredibly simple. Now, I'm going to do this one with the UV black color, which has these bluish flash accents. And in order to be able to manage it, as you can see, this is pointing which and every direction. And the idea to get a nice wing and body shape to this fly is to essentially treat this as a wet fly hackle. So basically do what Dave was doing earlier on the Magoo, tying that wet hackle, but in this case, in order to be able to manage this properly, I'm going to put a little bit of water on my fingertips and try to, fold this a little, okay? It's a little over enthusiastic with the water. You see here, there's a drop in the background. Okay. The other thing that I do here, and I don't know if this shows on the camera, in order to manage this, I took it off the card and I put it inside a little Ziploc bag, which I then closed and just let the chenille come out through it. So this kind of gives me like a bobbin kind of holding feature. So I can work with this without having to cut small pieces of it, because then I end up with a lot of waste. And a small package of this is quite pricey. So, okay, so attach this, simply fold the fibers back, secure here properly, and move the thread forward. And now just let the thread hang. And now we start wrapping. I could use the rotary vise, but in this case, because of all this preening of these fibers that you have to kind of constantly do this thing, just the core has a tendency to twist. It's really, I've been trying everything that I know to get this to behave, and it's just not very cooperative. So I found that this is the easiest way, at least for me, to wrap this material. So keep this under tension, keep pulling the fibers back. It's not looking very pretty, but it does catch fish. And it does look way better once it gets wet. If you find that this has dried too much and the fibers are starting to misbehave again, just a little bit of water will fix this. Okay. This water trick is a really nice one. It does help working with feathers that are sometimes, a little too dry and the fibers are not quite straight anymore. Pre-soaking some feathers can be a pretty good idea. In some cases, it really makes a difference between a well-tied fly and a really lousy one. Wally Lutz taught me this little trick as he was showing me how to properly do a wally wing, which means you take a soft breast feather from a pheasant or a duck, and you play with it and you make this really nice dry fly wing. Maybe we do this some other time. Anyway, I got sidetracked here. So at the end here, I spend a little bit more time trying to not have a gap between the body of the fly and the bead. So, sometimes it takes 3 wraps of of material more or less in place to achieve that. So here I'm going to do another 3 wraps to secure this as well as possible. And then do 3 wraps in front. Then I don't want to wreck my scissors on this. This is pretty thick core material. So I've learned that these little wire cutters are really, really good for this job. And snip. And now just a few tidying up wraps. So again, pull all the fibers back. If these things don't want to stay there, again, a little bit more water. Some other colors are a bit better than this black and purple. You can see here the gap I'm talking about. This may take a little bit of thread. It's not only I don't like the looks of having a gap there, but then you end up with a bead starting to move a little bit, and that can actually break your thread. So I'm going to do 2 whip finishes. 1. Twist this thread a little bit more. And 2. And because this thing is still wet with water, I'm going to first set it out to dry, and then I'm going to apply a little bit of Sally Hansen's here at this thread collar behind the bead. And that is the fly. Took me longer with all the talking, but you can whip up a bunch of these flies pretty much in no time. The bead-headed version is the easy one with the beads chain. And the nice thing is you can get these fluorescent colors now in bead chain. Those I like to have the tie. I like to tie the bead chain first. That speeds up the process quite a bit. And it also allows me to use slightly thicker, stronger thread for the bead chain so that things don't budge when you fish them. And anyway, my experience with them was I caught fish and lost the fly before I had a chance to break the fly apart. So that's that. Oh, and I didn't get around to it. I was going to tie, go 1 hook size down because I find this to be, to my taste at least, a little bit excessively large for trout. I was going to do some vampire leeches because I have some fluorescent green bead chain, and I'm going to combine that with the black and do some Halloween appropriate trout flies. And that's it for today.
Nice, Florin.
It's good.
And Dave.
And now let me just get the recording stopped. Stop recording.